Hello, my name is Max. I have Asperger syndrome. This video is the 7th part of a series of videos where I address the various symptoms of AS and give vivid examples of these symptoms from my own life. Briefly, before we begin, in case you haven't watched the first video and are not inclined to, refer to the description box for my Modus Operandi. It will only take a few seconds to read and might provide you with worthwhile context for the rest of this video and the series. For this video, in honor of having recently finished university, I thought I would talk about my experiences at school, from elementary to post-secondary. Even before I start, I can already sense the riptide of emotions washing over my Asperger viewers. The words confusion, frustration, depression don't come anywhere close to describing that black weight they probably feel in their stomach. All you have to do is say the word school, and the negative emotion you have repressed for so long at the back of your unconscious sees an opportunity to come forth and wreak havoc. As for my viewers who do not have AS, you might be confused. Shouldn't school be great for people with high-functioning autism? After all, aren't they supposed to have higher than average intelligence? Even if not all of them do, shouldn't that give some of them a discernible advantage over their peers? Who's to say also that people with AS don't like learning? Allow me to be more precise with my speech. Yes, we tend to have higher IQs. Yes, a lot of us understand the true value of a good education. However, modern education is not always a one-size-fits-all solution. Not just for people with AS, but anybody. Now, before I continue, I just want to let all of you know that there will be some pretty bleak-sounding stuff in the next few minutes, but please stick around until the end where I do offer some constructive and hopeful solutions. Picture an old classroom of yours. You're at a desk, surrounded by your peers, all facing a black or white board. For 6 hours every day, 5 days a week, you have to sit in an uncomfortable chair and stare at a black or white void that is from time to time filled with seemingly meaningless content which you have to memorize, or else. Your parents and professors lord the importance of your education over your impressionable head at every opportunity and infer that this environment is the best option available. Nevertheless, modern education reveals some truly unbearable elements, leading the child to question not just their sanity, but the sanity of the parents, professors, and politicians who uphold it. Granted, all of what I just said equally applies to the average child. When it comes to kids with AS, however, their struggles have the potential to take on a much more perverse form. And I'm not just talking about bullies who make fun of kids with AS, because bullies pick on anybody that's different. Rather, the educational framework we throw our children into has the potential to instill lasting damage. For instance, a common comorbid symptom of Asperger's is ADHD. The visible products of ADHD come about in a few different ways. If your child has AS, they might be so obsessively focused on one or two topics that interest them, causing them to neglect other priorities. For other children with AS, their neurology might cause them to react with great sensitivity to things they desperately don't want to do. And what makes matters worse is the fact that parents and teachers can't tell when the child's behavior is due to lack of discipline or legitimately due to factors out of their control. This is in stark contrast to a child who just has ADHD and not Asperger syndrome. Maybe their parents would just need to try different disciplinary techniques. Maybe they could try prescription drugs. As for the kid with AS, medication cannot rewire a brain. It can only potentially correct chemical imbalances. Two completely different scenarios. Proper discipline can help mitigate future outbursts and improve academics, but the fact remains that school, for somebody with AS, is still something to tolerate rather than embrace. The kid with AS is constantly at war with themselves regarding the true utility of education. They might wonder whether learning what mitochondria are is worth the bullying, the meltdowns, the misunderstandings, and the awkwardness. Yet, everybody emphasizes the importance of education. So, we keep our heads down and get through it. But how? Well, we might spend all day in class drawing, paying no attention to the teacher. We might focus solely on math because we enjoy that subject and neglect all others. We might cringe at the thought of gym class with the unbearable squeaking of sneakers and the gym teacher's whistle. Worse yet, we might fidget in our chairs all day because we're trying so hard to repress sensory overload. Obviously, you want to respect your teacher and honor your parents by not being disruptive in class or getting into altercations with other students, but your pre-existing sensitivity to loud noises and other offensive action does not have a healthy outlet. This could potentially lead to poor behavior in the classroom, physical retaliation against bullies, or worse, as the child moves on to middle and high school. It's hard to paint a universal picture when it comes to AS in education, aside from blatantly stating the obvious that school is hard, because it's obviously hard. Moreover, it's hard to distinguish why having AS makes school uniquely hard, because it seems our experiences overlap so often with the average child. I hope that by detailing specific examples from my own life, I can illustrate what those differences are and maybe give some insight regarding how one might give oneself or one's children a better educational experience. Here's a bit of Parenting 101. If you want to discipline your child, you have to make them experience some negative emotion from time to time. That way, they are ethically conditioned to do things that make themselves and the people around them happy. Given the fact that I have sensory overload issues, which makes me prone to the highest highs and the lowest lows, I learned my lessons very quickly. If I did something that made my teachers yell at me, the terror I felt was akin to the terror those belligerent children feel from beyond Scared Straight. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but honestly, whenever something went wrong, I trembled as if in the next few seconds I might fall dead. Therefore, anytime I did something wrong, I either learned my lesson immediately or very soon after. I quickly learned to stay quiet, memorize everything, and always speak respectfully to my teacher. This was in stark contrast to some of my other peers, mostly other boys who tended to do the exact opposite. Looking back, it is hard to lay the blame solely on them. After all, girls tend to perform better academically than boys because girls seem more adapted to learning via lecture, whereas boys seem to perform better via hands-on experience. Though at the time, I felt intense frustration when my fellow men wouldn't stay quiet so we could get through another day's torture, I realized now that they might have been acting out some form of unconscious rebellion toward the school system. Miraculously, however, I was not one of those boys. I was often praised by my teachers and other parents for being well-behaved and conscientious at school. All the way until high school, I got A's and A+s on everything. And though I struggled slightly in high school, I managed to maintain a high GPA when all was said and done. Yet, I have to repeat myself. School was something I tolerated, rather than embraced. From grade 1 to 12 and all the way through university, I was perpetually offended by my surroundings on account of both my immaturity and my sensitivity. I hated the meaningless homework assignments where I never learned anything but merely memorized. I hated the tendency of my bullies to torture me and get off scot-free. I hated the girls who would verbally abuse me if I happened to be in their mere vicinity. And worst of all, I hated knowing that there was nothing I could do to change my situation. With each passing year, these terrible thoughts were validated and cemented when my peers seemed to grow more unconscious of their stupidity and cruelty, and my teachers seemed to grow more apathetic towards the success of their students. With all of these realizations torturing me year after year, there were inevitably times where I could no longer repress. My brain, like a grenade, would undergo a chemical reaction and utterly obliterate anything within its effective radius. This obviously happened 2 or 3 times in my youth regarding bullies, but also happened in other scenarios you might not consider. I remember about a year and a half ago, the time came where I had to start fulfilling the English requirement for my university degree. I put it off for so long because the few English classes I had taken in the previous few years were so boring and pointless that they actually drove me to tears. Now forgive me for this slight aside, but it's important. The reason I detested English so much is not because I was bad at it. In fact, I was very good at it. Unlike my peers who were so utterly betrayed by the public school system and never learned how to write an essay, I do them in my spare time on my YouTube channel. No, the reason why I hated English is because the classes were so poorly structured. There was no core curriculum. In fiction classes, we never learned about Hemingway or Steinbeck. In non-fiction classes, we never read Solzhenitsyn or Frankl. Rather, to quote Camille Paglia, the university had a cafeteria-like menu where you can pick this course or that course without any kind of guidance from the university about a central core curriculum that teaches you history and chronology and introduces you to the basics. Because our professors are such prima donnas, they can only teach in their little areas, so we have this total fragmentation, end quote. And unfortunately, that fragmentation has come about on account of a nationwide attempt to decolonialize the curriculum. In the name of social justice, justice, great English works were removed from the core curriculum to please militant activists and their leftist professors. Literary standard bearers were removed to make way for an equitable representation of minority groups and the LGBT community, be they in the stories themselves or amongst the authors. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind diversity in my professors or my course materials, just as long as we're not forgetting the importance of intellectual diversity as well as preserving the core curriculum. Unlike my peers, I realized the salacious state of the modern university, and having to validate it so I could get my degree, which I have already paid so much for, was excruciating. A while ago, I had to read a book called Robinson Crusoe for a fiction class, and I remember reading the first 10 pages roughly 7 or 8 times in a row. Every time I would start reading, it was almost as if a part of my brain would stop functioning. I would read the words on the page, but I couldn't mentally visualize what the words were describing, as if my brain was deliberately trying to oppose my every effort. I'd try again, and the words would begin to blur on the page. I'd try again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until I lost my patience. I threw the book across the room, screamed my lungs out, and looked around for things I could guiltlessly break. And this is the most recent scenario of this sort, the one I could describe most vividly and accurately. Imagine being in this mindset hundreds of times over the course of 2 decades. When you're constantly being forced to do meaningless busy work in a less than ideal environment, let's say, it's not healthy. Unlike kids with AS, the average child might not like school and recognize its faults, but they will get along with it without persistent distress. As for me, to this day, the very thought of school at any period of my life haunts me. It was a soul-sucking siege. It got so bad that when I tearfully relayed my school experiences to a medical professional, they thought I showed legitimate signs of PTSD. PTSD from school! Now please forgive me, as I know I've painted a bleak picture up until this point, but it does not have to be this way. It really doesn't. Parents, listen up. If you have a kid or know a kid with AS that is having a hard time in school, the most important thing you can do for them is find out what they enjoy and what they are really good at. If it's music, put them in a school that specializes in music education. If it's languages, put them in an immersion school. More likely than not, they will excel to an unimaginable degree. You want proof? I'll tell you this. Even though I just badmouthed the English department at my university, I did extremely well on account of my passion for storytelling and analysis. I recently had to take a children's literature class, for example, and I never read more than a chapter of the 3 main texts we had to study. Because I had a pre-existing aptitude for essay writing, I still managed to get an A in the course. When it comes to people with AS, our passion for certain subjects can grow to such extents that what might seem like arduous work for 99% of the population is like child's play for us. I can't tell you how many times I've received messages from people with AS who tell me about how they found something they loved doing, and now their lives are so productive and fulfilling. Admittedly, however, things can get difficult. Some people don't know where to start. In response to that, I would like to offer an effective and free solution. Starting January 9th, I will be doing a weekly live stream called Differently Wired. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the show will address questions submitted via email, Twitter, and YouTube chat regarding issues not just involving Asperger syndrome, but depression, anxiety, ADHD, and more. My co-host is a man named John Tucker, who has worked with students for a number of years. He heard my stories of academic adversity and helped me immensely these past couple of years. If you're having trouble with school or mental health, I highly recommend you send in a question. You can email your question to maxderrat@yahoo.ca, or you can tweet your question to me using the hashtag differentlywired, all one word. Until then, my fellow Aspergians, just remember, you deserve to be happy.